The void between star systems held secrets, but none as perplexing as the massive colony ship that drifted like a wounded beast against the inky backdrop of unexplored space. Captain Zarak of the Zaraxian scout vessel felt an unprecedented tremor of unease crawl along the neural implants that lined her cranial ridge. Her species had explored thousands of star systems, encountered hundreds of civilizations, but nothing prepared them for this. The ship's exterior told a story of survival that defied comprehension. Massive hull breaches were sealed with what appeared to be a hybrid of technological patch and organic tissue. Radiation scarring created intricate patterns that looked almost like intentional modifications rather than random damage. Micrometeorite impacts had punctured the outer hull in dozens of locations, yet the ship maintained structural integrity through means that challenged every known principle of engineering. "Scan again," Zarak commanded, her voice tight with a mixture of professional curiosity and growing anxiety. Lieutenant Krell, her primary sensor officer, manipulated the holographic control interface. His three-fingered hands moved with practiced precision, but each scan returned results that seemed to defy logical interpretation. "Captain, the readings are anomalous. The ship's internal environment suggests partial life support, but not in any configuration we've ever encountered." The ship's silhouette against the starfield was massive, a colony vessel designed to transport thousands of humans to a distant settlement. By all calculations, it should have been a tomb. No species could survive the cumulative damage visible on its exterior. No technological system could maintain even minimal functionality after such extensive trauma. A sudden pulse of energy rippled across the ship's hull. It wasn't a weapon discharge or a standard power signal. It was something more organic, more alive. "Movement detected," Krell reported, his translator rendering his clicking language into standard galactic communication. But not mechanical, not precisely biological either. Zarak leaned forward, her iridescent eyes narrowing. The ship's primary viewing screen zoomed in, revealing details that sent a chill through her exoskeleton. The hull breaches weren't just sealed, they were healing. Microscopic tendrils of what appeared to be a hybrid material were slowly reconstructing damaged sections, bridging gaps with a living mechanism that blurred the line between technology and organic matter. "Prepare boarding protocols," she ordered, but with extreme caution. The boarding shuttle approached with calculated precision. Zaraxian boarding teams were renowned for their methodical approach to unknown vessels. Each member wore advanced environmental suits capable of protecting against virtually any biological or technological threat. Magnetic grapples connected to the ship's hull, creating a seal that would allow careful entry. Lieutenant Commander Vex led the boarding team. His personal record included successful investigations of over 50 derelict vessels across multiple star systems. But something about this human ship made the sensory nodes along his spine twitch with an emotion closest to fear. The airlock opened with a sound that was part mechanical hiss, part organic groan. The team's sensors immediately went into overdrive. Environmental readings fluctuated wildly. Atmospheric composition changed with each passing second, as if the ship itself was breathing, adapting. Initial scan shows potential life signs. Vex reported back to the main vessel, but nothing matching standard biological parameters. They moved through corridors that seemed to pulse with a weird, almost alive quality. Sections of the wall appeared to shift and reconfigure as the team passed. Diagnostic equipment struggled to make sense of the environment. Technological systems merged with biological structures in ways that should be impossible. And then they found him. Mike Thompson lay in a hibernation chamber that was more a living cocoon than a standard medical unit, cables that seemed to breathe intertwined with his body. His skin showed multiple layers of genetic modifications, complex patterns of augmentation that suggested continuous, aggressive adaptation. He wasn't just sleeping, he was waiting. As the Zaraxian team approached, Thompson's eyes flickered. Not with the slow awakening of a hibernating organism, but with the calculated awareness of a predator becoming suddenly, terrifyingly alert. The galaxy was about to learn a fundamental truth. Humans were never just survivors. They were something far more dangerous. The mission logs of the colony ship Horizon unfolded like a manual of impossible survival. Each recovered fragment told a story that would shatter everything the Ziraxian researchers understood about biological endurance and technological adaptation. Project Pathfinder had been humanity's most ambitious deep space colonization effort. Launched from Earth during a period of critical resource depletion and environmental collapse, the mission represented humanity's last great hope. 12,000 colonists, carefully selected for genetic potential, psychological resilience, and specialized skills, had embarked on a journey to establish a settlement in the Kepler 452 system. No one expected them to survive. The first major disaster struck just 6 months into the journey. A massive solar radiation burst, the kind that would have instantly killed any other known species, ripped through the ship's initial protective systems. Standard shielding would have failed immediately, but the human colonists had prepared differently. Mike Thompson's personal logs revealed the first layers of their survival strategy. The mission's chief geneticist, he had overseen a radical pre-launch modification program. Each colonist carried a suite of genetic adaptations that went far beyond simple medical engineering. Their DNA was a living, programmable system designed to respond to environmental threats in real time. When the radiation hit, something extraordinary happened. Cellular repair mechanisms activated that were more than simple regeneration. The colonists' bodies began to actively rewrite their genetic code. Radiation-resistant markers emerged. Metabolic processes shifted to neutralize cellular damage. What should have been a fatal incident became nothing more than a minor biological adjustment. But the challenges were only beginning. 17 months into the journey, a catastrophic micrometeorite storm struck the ship. Hundreds of impacts punctured the hull, creating damage that should have been fatal. Standard emergency protocols would have involved immediate evacuation or complete system shutdown. The human response was something else entirely. Thompson's logs described a process that defied conventional understanding. As hull breaches appeared, colonists deployed an adaptive nanomaterial system. These microscopic machines didn't just patch holes. They analyzed the damage, understood the environmental stress, and began reconstructing the ship's structure using a combination of technological and biological processes. Living tissue merged with mechanical systems. Hull breaches became sites of active reconstruction. The ship itself became a living organism, adapting and healing in real time. The psychological profiles of the colonists were equally fascinating. Where other species would have succumbed to despair, these humans treated each challenge as a problem to be solved. Communication logs showed remarkable calm. Strategic discussions. Collaborative problem-solving that transformed potential catastrophe into an opportunity for advancement. Life support failures became another test of human ingenuity. When critical systems began to fail, the colonists didn't just attempt repairs. They began to modify themselves. Metabolic processes were adjusted to require minimal oxygen. Cellular efficiency was enhanced to work under extreme stress. Some colonists developed symbiotic relationships with technological systems, their bodies becoming living interfaces that could directly manipulate and repair ship functions. Mike Thompson's own modifications were particularly extreme. Neural interfaces that went beyond traditional cybernetic augmentation. Biological systems that could actively rewrite themselves in response to environmental challenges. He wasn't just a leader. He was a living example of human potential for adaptation. The most critical moment came 3 years into the journey. A complete systemic failure should have meant certain death. Instead, the colonists transformed the entire ship into a survival mechanism. Critical systems were redistributed. Biological and technological boundaries blurred. Where other species would have seen defeat, humans saw an engineering challenge. Recovery logs showed something even more remarkable. Each challenge made the colonists stronger, more adaptive. Their very survival became a process of continuous evolution. The Ziraxian researchers reviewing the logs felt something close to terror. This wasn't just a survival story. It was a blueprint for a species that could turn any environment into an opportunity. a species that didn't just adapt to challenges, they transformed them. Mike Thompson's final log entry before entering hibernation was chillingly simple. Survival is not about preservation. It's about continuous transformation. The galaxy was about to learn exactly what that meant. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's research files represented the pinnacle of human biological engineering. Spread across the holographic displays in the Zaraxian Research Facility, her genetic studies looked less like medical documentation and more like a blueprint for impossible life. The alien research team worked in a state of perpetual shock. Mike Thompson's body was a living laboratory of adaptation that challenged every known principle of biological science. Where other species saw genetic code as a fixed blueprint, humans had transformed DNA into a dynamic, programmable system. Chief xenobiologist Krelax approached the suspended biological sample with a mixture of professional curiosity and visceral dread. Thompson's cellular structure defied every classification system in galactic scientific records. Each cell was a miniature survival machine, capable of near-instantaneous reconfiguration. The radiation resistance alone was mind-breaking. Traditional biological systems would suffer catastrophic damage from prolonged cosmic radiation exposure. Thompson's cells didn't just resist radiation, they actively transformed it into usable energy. Radiation markers that would kill most species became additional power sources for his cellular metabolism. Genetic sequencing revealed multiple layers of modification that went far beyond simple genetic engineering. Each DNA strand showed complex algorithmic patterns, suggesting a level of internal programming that blurred the line between biological organism and adaptive computer system. "Look here." Dr. Krelax pointed to a holographic projection of Thompson's neural network. "These are not standard neural connections. They're adaptive pathways that can literally reshape themselves in response to environmental stimuli." The neural interface was a nightmare of biological complexity. Synaptic connections that could dynamically reconfigure themselves. Cellular memory systems that went beyond traditional biological storage. Each neural pathway was a living, breathing algorithm of survival. Metabolic analysis showed equally terrifying capabilities. Thompson's body could shift its entire energy processing system in moments. Oxygen, optional. Radiation, potential fuel source. Extreme cold or heat, merely another environmental parameter to be managed. The genetic modifications weren't random. They showed clear, strategic design. Each adaptation was a calculated response to potential survival challenges. Cellular repair mechanisms that could rebuild damaged DNA in real time. Metabolic systems that could switch between multiple energy processing methods instantaneously. Most disturbing was the symbiotic relationship between biological and technological systems. Nanotechnological interfaces were so deeply integrated that they were indistinguishable from organic tissue. Thompson's body wasn't just modified. It was a living, breathing technological system. "This isn't genetic engineering," Dr. Krelax muttered. "This is genetic warfare." The reproductive potential was equally shocking. Genetic markers suggested that these modifications could be passed down to future generations, not as static inheritance, but as a dynamic, adaptable genetic framework that could continue to evolve. Comparative studies with other human genetic samples showed a consistent pattern. This wasn't an isolated modification. It was a species-wide approach to biological survival. Each human carried the potential for radical adaptation, a living library of survival strategies. Muscle tissue samples demonstrated capabilities that defied biological limitations. Cellular structures that could rapidly reorganize to provide maximum efficiency under any environmental stress. Bone density that could adjust in real time. Circulatory systems that could redistribute resources with mathematical precision. The respiratory system was particularly fascinating. Lung tissue that could extract oxygen from environments that should be lethal. Cellular membranes that could filter and process toxic atmospheres. Breathing became less a biological necessity and more a strategic option. Immune systems were equally mind-breaking. Where other species developed specific antibodies, Thompson's cellular defense mechanisms could actively predict and neutralize potential threats. Viral invasion, transformed into additional cellular resources. Bacterial infection, immediate cellular reconfiguration. Dr. Krulax realized they were looking at something more than a biological organism. This was a living weapon of adaptation, a species that didn't just survive. They transformed the very concept of survival. The final report was less a scientific document and more a warning. Humans weren't just another spacefaring species. They were a fundamental redesign of what it meant to be a living organism. Mike Thompson wasn't just a survivor. He was a blueprint for a species that could turn any challenge into an opportunity for growth. The galaxy was about to learn the true meaning of evolution. The interview room hummed with tension. Mike Thompson sat perfectly still, a living embodiment of controlled potential. The Xeraxian researchers had prepared months of carefully constructed questioning protocols. Each hoped to understand the fundamental nature of human survival. They would learn something far more terrifying. Dr. Krulax began with what seemed like a simple question. How did your species survive? Thompson's response was not what they expected. Survival is an active verb, he said, his voice calm and precise. Not a state of being, but a continuous process of transformation. The translation systems worked overtime to capture the nuanced meaning. Each word carried layers of implications that stretched far beyond simple linguistic communication. Humans didn't just survive. They engaged with survival as an intellectual and biological challenge. Psychological profiles recovered from the colony ship revealed a fundamental difference in human cognitive processing. Where most known species saw obstacles as threats, humans saw them as problems to be solved. Every challenge was an equation. Every limitation a system to be understood and ultimately overcome. Thompson explained their approach using multiple complex analogies. Imagine an environment not as something you endure, but as a living puzzle. Each constraint is a variable to be manipulated. Each threat is information waiting to be processed. The researchers realized they were witnessing something beyond standard survival instinct. This was a predatory approach to existence itself. Biological adaptation was just one layer of their strategy. Human intelligence approached survival as a multi-dimensional challenge. Technological systems could be rewritten. Biological constraints could be reconfigured. Environmental limitations were merely temporary parameters waiting to be expanded. We don't compete, Thompson continued. We transform. Every system can be understood. Every limitation can be redefined. Recovered mission logs demonstrated this philosophy in practice. When life support systems began to fail during their journey, the colonists didn't just attempt repairs. They began to fundamentally redesign the entire concept of survival. Metabolic processes were rewritten. Technological systems were merged with biological capabilities. The ship itself became a living organism of adaptation. The psychological resilience was equally shocking. Communication logs showed no panic during critical moments. Instead, there were collaborative problem-solving discussions, strategic planning that treated each potential disaster as an engineering challenge. Dr. Krulax found herself understanding the true nature of human predation. It wasn't about physical aggression or territorial conquest. It was an intellectual and biological approach that treated every environment as a system to be comprehended and ultimately mastered. Thompson's personal logs revealed a species-wide approach to challenges. Education systems that taught adaptability as a primary skill. Cultural narratives that celebrated problem-solving over traditional achievement. A fundamental worldview that saw limitations as temporary constructs waiting to be dismantled. The most disturbing revelation was the recursive nature of human adaptation. Each challenge made them stronger. Each limitation became an opportunity for growth. Where other species would see defeat, humans saw an invitation to evolve. Survival is not about preservation, Thompson repeated. It's about continuous transformation. The Xeraxian researchers began to understand the true terror of human potential. This wasn't just a survival strategy. It was a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to exist as an intelligent species. Technological systems could be rewritten. Biological constraints could be reconfigured. Environmental limitations were merely temporary parameters waiting to be expanded. Humans didn't adapt to environments. They actively redesigned them. The final psychological profile was less a scientific document and more a warning. Humans weren't just another spacefaring species. They were a fundamental redesign of what it meant to be an intelligent, adaptive organism. As the interview concluded, Dr. Krillak realized something fundamental. Mike Thompson wasn't just describing a survival strategy. He was providing a blueprint for a species that could turn any challenge into an opportunity for growth. The galaxy was about to learn the true meaning of predation, not through violence, but through an unrelenting capacity to understand, adapt, and ultimately transform. The emergency session of the Galactic Confederation convened in absolute silence. Holographic displays flickered with data from the human colony ship, each projection more terrifying than the last. Representatives from 17 different starfaring civilizations sat frozen, processing a threat unlike anything they had ever encountered. Ambassador Krellmax of the Xeraxian Diplomatic Corps stepped forward, his neural tendrils pulsing with a mixture of fear and clinical detachment. The recovered data from Mike Thompson and the Horizon mission represented more than just a scientific anomaly. It was a fundamental challenge to every established understanding of biological and technological evolution. "We are not discussing a species," Krellmax began, his translator rendering his clicking language into standard galactic communication. "We are discussing a living system of adaptation that treats entire environments as problems to be solved." The quantum harmony representatives from the Vesper cluster were the first to break the silence. Their crystalline communication matrices projected a holographic representation of their collective panic. Humans represented a threat that went beyond traditional military or technological concerns. They were a species that could potentially rewrite the fundamental rules of survival. Defensive strategies were drafted and immediately discarded. Traditional weapon systems seemed laughably inadequate against a species that could potentially transform technological attacks into additional resources. Quarantine protocols were proposed, then dismissed as equally futile. The Nexus Accord delegation presented their analysis. Genetic studies of human colonists showed a terrifying pattern of adaptive potential. Each challenge encountered during their journey hadn't just been survived. It had been transformed into an opportunity for further evolution. Radiation events became energy sources. Technological failures became chances for redesign. Environmental constraints were treated as temporary limitations waiting to be overcome. "We are looking at a species that doesn't just adapt," the Nexus representative projected, "but actively seeks to redesign the very parameters of existence." Intelligence reports from human colony locations across known space painted an equally disturbing picture. Every established settlement showed signs of continuous aggressive adaptation. Environments that should have been hostile were being systematically transformed. Technological systems were being merged with biological capabilities in ways that defied conventional understanding. The quantum harmonic representative's communication matrix displayed a series of probability projections that sent a chill through the assembled delegates. If left unchecked, human colonization could potentially transform entire star systems, not through traditional conquest, but through a process of continuous, adaptive redesign. Military strategists from the Cluster Confederacy proposed preemptive strikes. But even these recommendations came with significant caveats. How do you attack a species that could potentially transform your own weapon systems into additional resources? Deep space monitoring stations reported increasing human expansion. But it wasn't expansion in the traditional sense. These weren't military conquests or resource grabs. They were systematic explorations that simultaneously studied and transformed their target environments. The most disturbing reports came from border colonies. Human settlement teams didn't just establish outposts. They began a process of environmental integration that blurred the lines between colonization and fundamental planetary redesign. Hostile environments were being systematically transformed. Ecological systems were being reimagined. They don't conquer, one analyst noted. They integrate. They transform. Emergency protocols were drafted, redrafted, and then abandoned. Traditional defensive strategies seemed laughably inadequate. How do you defend against a species that treats every challenge as an opportunity for growth? The final recommendation was both a strategic assessment and a warning. Humans were not to be approached as a traditional spacefaring civilization. They were a living, adaptive system that could potentially redesign the fundamental parameters of galactic existence. Ambassador Krulnax's concluding statement sent a chill through the assembled representatives. "We are not facing a species," he projected. "We are facing a fundamental reimagining of what it means to exist." The galaxy held its collective breath. Something fundamental was changing, and no one was quite sure how to respond. Survival was about to be redefined. The challenge came without warning. A quantum communication burst that simultaneously reached every major galactic governing body, cutting through their most secure communication networks as if they were nothing more than primitive radio signals. Mike Thompson's image materialized across 1,000 different communication platforms. He wasn't broadcasting. He was presenting, calm, calculated, with the precision of someone explaining a simple mathematical equation. "I offer a challenge," he began, his voice carrying a resonance that seemed to bypass traditional audio processing. "Prove that your civilizations can adapt more effectively than humanity." The transmission continued, revealing the parameters of a test that would shake the foundations of galactic understanding. Multiple domains would be evaluated: technological innovation, biological adaptation, strategic problem-solving, and environmental integration. The challenge wasn't a competition. It was a systematic deconstruction of what different species considered survival. First came the technological challenge. Each participating civilization would be presented with a series of increasingly complex engineering problems. Not simple puzzles, but multi-layered challenges that required complete system redesign. Thompson's parameters were clear. Solutions couldn't just solve the immediate problem. They needed to create additional capabilities beyond the original challenge. The biological component was even more complex. Participants would face environmental simulations that pushed the boundaries of survival, radiation levels that should be fatal, atmospheric conditions that defied conventional life support systems, gravitational stresses that would crush standard organic structures. Strategic problem-solving would evaluate how different species approached seemingly impossible challenges, not just finding solutions, but transforming the very nature of the challenge itself. The final component was perhaps the most disturbing: environmental integration tests that would require participants to not just survive in hostile environments, but to actively reshape those environments. Survival is not passive, Thompson's transmission continued. It is an active process of continuous transformation. The stakes were unprecedented. For any civilization that could match or exceed human adaptive capabilities, Thompson promised to surrender all recovered human research and technological data. Failure meant something more profound: a complete revaluation of their understanding of intelligent life. Quantum communication networks buzzed with activity. Some civilizations saw this as an opportunity. Others recognized it as an existential threat. The Xerexian Confederation was the first to formally accept. Their chief strategists saw this as a chance to understand the human approach to adaptation. Dr. Krulnax personally oversaw their preparation, knowing that failure meant more than just losing a challenge. It meant acknowledging a fundamental limitation in their species' understanding of survival. Preparation teams worked around the clock. Genetic engineers, technological specialists, strategic analysts, each worked to create systems that could potentially match human adaptability. But Thompson's challenge went deeper than simple problem-solving. Each test was designed to push the boundaries of what different species considered possible. Traditional approaches would fail immediately. Success required a complete reimagining of survival strategies. The first technological challenge demonstrated this immediately. Participants were given a series of seemingly impossible engineering problems. Those who attempted traditional solution methods found themselves immediately eliminated. The biological tests were even more brutal. Environmental simulations that would kill standard organic life became opportunities for transformation. Radiation levels became energy sources. Atmospheric pressures became variables to be manipulated. Strategic problem-solving revealed the true nature of the challenge. It wasn't about finding solutions. It was about fundamentally reimagining the nature of the problem itself. As the challenge began, one thing became clear. This was more than a test of different civilizations. It was a fundamental examination of what it means to be an intelligent, adaptive species. Survival was about to be redefined. And humanity was holding the blueprint. The challenge unfolded like a systematic deconstruction of galactic understanding. Each test became a brutal revelation of human adaptive capabilities that left the assembled civilizations in a state of collective shock. The first technological challenge seemed simple on the surface. Participants were presented with a complex engineering problem involving simultaneous energy distribution, material stress management, and quantum communication stabilization. Most species approached it with their standard technological frameworks. Mike Thompson's demonstration was anything but standard. Where others saw separate systems, Thompson revealed a holistic approach that transformed the entire problem into a living, adaptive network. Technological components weren't just solved, they were reimagined. Energy distribution became a dynamic, self-regulating ecosystem. Material stress management turned into a responsive biological-technological hybrid that could predict and neutralize potential failures before they occurred. The Xeraxian observation team watched in horrified fascination. Thompson didn't just solve the problem. He fundamentally redesigned the entire conceptual framework of the challenge. Biological adaptation tests pushed even further into the realm of the impossible. Participants were placed in environmental simulations that would kill standard organic life. Radiation levels that should have been instantly fatal. Atmospheric pressures that would crush conventional biological structures. Gravitational stresses that would liquefy standard organic matter. The human response was a masterclass in survival. Thompson demonstrated cellular reconfiguration that went beyond simple adaptation. His body wasn't just surviving the extreme conditions, it was actively transforming them into opportunities for growth. Radiation became an energy source. Extreme pressures became variables to be managed and ultimately controlled. Most shocking was the speed of adaptation. Where other species would require generations to develop minimal environmental resistance, humans could reconfigure their biological systems in real time. Each challenge became an opportunity for immediate, aggressive evolution. Strategic problem-solving tests revealed the true depth of human cognitive capabilities. Participants were presented with increasingly complex scenarios that required multi-layered solutions. Traditional approaches failed immediately. Thompson's method was something entirely different. He didn't just solve problems. He fundamentally reimagined their basic parameters. Constraints became opportunities. Limitations became variables to be manipulated. Each challenge was treated as a living system waiting to be understood and transformed. The environmental integration tests were perhaps the most revealing. Participants were placed in hostile environments and asked to establish sustainable living conditions. Most species approached this with traditional colonization strategies. Humans transformed the entire concept of environmental interaction. Thompson demonstrated an approach that was part engineering, part biological adaptation, and part fundamental system redesign. Hostile environments weren't obstacles to be overcome. They were systems to be understood and ultimately reshaped. Barren planetary surfaces became potential habitats. Toxic atmospheres were systematically transformed. Extreme gravitational conditions were re-engineered to support life. Each test revealed another layer of human adaptive potential. Technological systems merged with biological capabilities. Problem-solving became a dynamic, living process of continuous transformation. The assembled civilizations watched as their most advanced strategies were systematically dismantled. Traditional concepts of survival, adaptation, and problem-solving collapsed under the weight of human capabilities. Dr. Krulax, leading the Xeraxian observation team, realized they were witnessing something far more profound than a simple challenge. This was a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be an intelligent, adaptive species. As the final tests concluded, a profound silence descended across the galactic communication networks. The challenge wasn't just one. It was completely redefined. Survival was no longer about preservation. It was about continuous, aggressive transformation. And humanity had just shown the galaxy exactly what that meant. The silence that followed the challenge was more profound than any declaration of victory. Mike Thompson stood at the center of a holographic projection that spanned multiple star systems, representing something far more significant than a single species achievement. Diplomatic channels across the galaxy struggled to process the implications. This wasn't just a demonstration of superior capabilities. It was a fundamental reimagining of what intelligent life could be. The Xeraxian Confederation called an emergency summit. Dr. Krillax presented findings that would reshape galactic understanding. Humanity wasn't a threat to be contained. They were a potential key to solving challenges that had stumped multiple civilizations for millennia. "We are not dealing with a species," Dr. Krillax explained to the assembled representatives. "We are dealing with a living system of continuous adaptation that treats existence itself as a problem to be solved." Thompson's role shifted from a potential threat to a diplomatic liaison, but not in any traditional sense. He represented something more complex, a bridge between different approaches to survival, intelligence, and evolution. Recovered research from the human colony ship revealed layers of potential that went far beyond initial observations. Genetic archives showed a species-wide approach to adaptation that was both terrifyingly precise and infinitely flexible. Each challenge encountered became an opportunity for growth. Each limitation was a puzzle waiting to be solved. The most profound revelation was the philosophical approach underlying human adaptation. Survival wasn't about preservation. It was about continuous transformation. Every environment was a system to be understood. Every constraint was a variable to be manipulated. Galactic research institutions began collaborative projects with human scientists, not out of diplomatic necessity, but from a genuine recognition of their unique approach to problem-solving. Challenges that had seemed insurmountable, environmental restoration, technological limitations, biological constraints, became potential areas of breakthrough. Mike Thompson's personal research became a cornerstone of a new approach to understanding intelligent life. His work demonstrated that adaptation wasn't just a biological process. It was a comprehensive approach to existence itself. The human perspective challenged fundamental assumptions about evolution, intelligence, and survival. Where most species saw limitations, humans saw opportunities. Where others perceived obstacles, humans saw systems waiting to be understood and transformed. Diplomatic reports began to reframe the human presence in the galaxy. They weren't conquerors. They weren't even traditional explorers. They were transformative agents, a species that could fundamentally reshape environments, technological systems, and understanding itself. Educational systems across multiple civilizations began incorporating human adaptive strategies, not as a technological approach, but as a fundamental philosophical framework for understanding complex challenges. Thompson's final public address captured the essence of their approach. "Intelligence is not about knowing," he explained. "It's about the continuous process of understanding and transformation. Every challenge is an invitation. Every limitation is an opportunity." The galaxy was learning a new language of survival. Planetary restoration projects that had been impossible became potential realities. Technological challenges that had seemed insurmountable became collaborative opportunities. Biological limitations were revealed as temporary constraints waiting to be redesigned. Some civilizations approached this new understanding with excitement, others with fear, but none could ignore the fundamental shift that was occurring. Humanity had demonstrated something profound. Survival wasn't about strength. It wasn't about technological superiority. It was about the capacity to understand, adapt, and ultimately transform. As communication networks processed the implications of the challenge, a new understanding began to emerge. Humans weren't a threat to be contained. They were a potential key to solving challenges that had seemed impossible. The final diplomatic report from the Xeraxian Confederation captured the essence of this new understanding. We are witnessing the emergence of a species that does not just survive. They transform, not through conquest, not through destruction, but through an unrelenting capacity to understand, adapt, and reimagine the very nature of existence itself. The galaxy was about to change, and humanity was leading the way.